Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES-TV.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, among his many accomplishments, Moon Landrieu served as Executive Secretary of the Commission to build the Superdome. With the dome would come an NFL franchise and national prestige for the city. On this, the weekend of the former mayor's funeral, the Saints coincidentally open a new season, another part of his legacy. We'll look at the impact that Landrieu had on the city's politics and the history behind it. Elsewhere, there was more upheaval at the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office, and our Future Watch segment looks at hunger and food insecurity in the region. That plus the Saints and LSU in Tulane are in the lineup for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Jeff Duncan, sports reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, also analyst for Fox 8 Sports. I'm going to go over to E first and talk about Moon Landrieu, who passed away this week at age 92, a former New Orleans mayor who just did so much for this community and leaves such a legacy.
And there's a lot to say, and to help get the message across, I want to start off with a brief clip from a couple of years ago at the time of the tricentennial, where they're talking about some of the highlights in the city's history. If the narrator's voice sounds familiar, that's Dennis Waltering, formerly of Channel 4.
Moon Landrieu served as the 56th mayor of New Orleans from 1970 to 1978. He also served as state representative, city councilman, U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and judge of the Fourth State Circuit Court of Appeal. Which role was his favorite?
It's not even close. The mayor of the city of New Orleans was by far the most active, the most interesting, and the most challenging. And race was by far the greatest challenge.
On city council, Landrieu was pivotal in approval of an ordinance to outlaw segregation. As mayor, he says he worked to bring about integration.
Hiring the first black employees, the first department heads, giving out the first black contracts to professionals, and I think it advanced the city.
Landrieu also appointed Terrence DuVernay as the city's first African-American chief administrative officer, the number 2 job in city government.
The International Trade Mart wouldn't accept a black who was terribly well qualified. And I told them I'd just declare the building off limits if you didn't take the man.
He says opponents called him all kinds of names. And years earlier, when he was in the legislature, he says a well-known segregationist confronted him about his anti-segregation efforts.
And he said, "We know you're con and we're gonna get you." Well, it's kind of being a marked man. I'm not a hero. I had sweaty palms, believe me.
Landrieu was involved in planning and construction of the Superdome and the Piazza d'Italia. He promoted tourism with projects like the Moonwalk, plus renovation of Jackson Square and the French Market. He established the Historic District Landmarks Commission, extending protection of historic properties beyond the French Quarter. He says his wife Verna motivated his interest in politics. Together they had 9 children, and 2 of them, former U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu and former Mayor Mitch Landrieu, followed him into politics.
And I'm proud of it, to be honest with you.
Oh, and he certainly had much to be proud of, and his family has so much to be proud of, too.
His election, the election itself was in '69. He became mayor in '70, but it was really a pivotal election in New Orleans history, and it showed a major change. And there was one incident in particular that really highlighted it. In the runoffs, he was in the runoff against a man named Jimmy Fitzmaurice. Jimmy Fitzmaurice was a very popular politician. He, like Landrieu, was a councilman at large. The two of them were actually friends. They were, old New Orleans family people. And so there wasn't really any animosity, but they were pitched on a runoff. And there was a debate. And back in those days, this wasn't too many years after the Kennedy-Nixon debates, and so debates was very popular and people would watch them. So there's a local televised debate between Landrieu and Fitzmaurice, and one of the reporters, I believe it was Alec Gifford, asked this question. He says, of both candidates, and the question was, would you promise that if elected mayor, that you would appoint a black person to a major city job? So Fitzmaurice answered first, and he said, no. I'll appoint the best person I can find. Now, what he meant was that he didn't want to be committed to a promise, but of course he would if he could find the right person. Landrieu, on the other hand, just said, yes, I will. And that made a big difference because it came across as Fitzmaurice saying that he was going to appoint a black person, and he probably would have, I think, but it certainly showed the commitment that Landrieu had. When the election returns came after the primary in '69 and people analyzed them, they were shocked. Landrieu had received 90% of the black vote. He was the first mayor elected by a black majority. And what had happened in the past in urban politics, and especially New Orleans, what there was the black vote had always pretty much been controlled by ministers. By '69, the Voting Rights Act had passed in '65. The liberations, the voting rolls had grown significantly. How significantly? In '65, only 21% of registered black voters were on the polls. In '69, the number was 60% and growing. And so the black vote had grown significantly. But the other thing that happened is that there were a lot of new political organizations with acronym names BOLD and SOUL and COOP, all run by young men in the black community who really organized and got their vote out. And they would become a force in black politics for years. And they believed in Landrieu because they knew as a legislator at the time that he was there, about 10 years earlier, that there had been a lot of segregationist legislation that the legislature was trying to pass through. In some of them, Landrieu was the only one to vote no. And so he kind of stood out with animosity with some of the legislators. But I think at a time when people were getting more sensitive on civil rights issues, it certainly showed where he stood and gained support.
He stood for what he believed was right.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, he was really, very instrumental in changing much of the landscape of New Orleans, like on Poydras Street, and as you said, the Superdome, instrumental in making that much more commercial.
He was a big champion of the Superdome and did a lot of development for tourism. There was a little bit of a tussle between preservationists and him. But one thing I wanted to mention, in '75, he was elected chairman of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So he was sort of like the mayor's mayor. And that was the year that New York City was having a huge financial crisis. John Lindsay was mayor, and it needed a federal bailout, and the federal government was saying no. So it was Moon Landrieu, who was the mayor of New Orleans, who went to Washington to save New York City, to campaign for it, to get the funding. And it did get the funding, and they helped it pull its way through.
He was such a dynamic man. I know as a young reporter that I was in the '70s, it was kind of, sometimes you'd get a little nervous going there to a press conference with him because he was serious and he would let you know if you weren't right with your question. I mean, he sort of held your feet to the fire.
Oh yeah, he was very
He
serious.
demanded the best of journalists.
Yeah. There was one incident where a reporter asked a question and showed she had no idea what she was talking about, and he pretty much walked out on it. But at the same time, I mean, he could be very articulate, and you can learn a lot from listening to him. A
very, very smart man and a great husband and family man, and he died peacefully with his family by his side, and we know that they're hurting right now. They're very proud of their dad, and they miss him, and we certainly send our heartfelt condolences to the Landrieu family. Thanks a lot, E. Okay, Mike, let's go on over to you. The latest news coming out of the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office.
Well, the latest was just this week with the firing of 4 very key commanders at the jail and a 5th who they say was let go, but apparently he was fired as well. And, you know, in this instance, perhaps the question is maybe why didn't this happen earlier? These were holdovers from the previous Sheriff Marlon Gusman. The 5th person had gone all the way back to Sheriff Charles Fody, and usually with the change in the politically elected leadership, there's going to be a change in some of those top command posts. We know that obviously the new sheriff, Susan Hudson's executive staff are all new people that she brought in. But one of the questions being raised, of course, is that she came in without corrections experience, and many of her top executives also kind of came in without executive experience, and she complained publicly about not getting much of help with the transition from Gusman and his people. And now, this is 4 months into her tenure, she's letting go, some of the people who were holdovers, yes, but actually have years of experience, more than 100 years between all 5 of them in running a jail. So really, if you look at the beginning of Susan Hudson's tenure, what has not happened at that jail? Within a month, there was a inmate fight involving 4 of the detainees, 2 knives, and one of those inmates killed, tragically, not knifed, but beaten. 2 days after that, a suicide. Let's not forget, shortly after that, she pulled all of her deputies out of the criminal court security detail, which is actually part of their job, dictated by state law, and it basically brought that criminal court to a grinding halt, just as the gears on the criminal court were revving up with trials scheduled and juries scheduled to come in, and she had to walk that back very, very quickly when everyone from DAs to judges, fired back that she can't do that. And it's just been one thing after another ever since then. I had a story that aired just this week on her taking one of the largest groups ever to the Sheriff's Convention, the LSA, Louisiana Sheriff's Association annual conference is held in Sandestin, of course. Why would a bunch of Louisiana sheriffs meet here in Louisiana? They go to Destin, to the beach, many bring families, but she brought a large group, all at taxpayer expense, leaving none of the top people behind to run the jail. And during the course of that trip, let's just say, go back to 3 days before leaving, there was a knife fight between inmates, which sent one inmate to the hospital. They all went nevertheless, and in the course of that 5-day conference, there were 3 more stabbings and a couple of which ended up with inmates in the hospital. So quite a bit of chaos. I think that even her supporters, who I've had in some of my stories, questioning some of her decisions, and it's not been an easy ramp up for Sheriff Susan Hudson.
So now what happens with these individuals who were dismissed and then one resigned, right? There was 4 that were dismissed and 1 resigned?
Well, they say resigned, but it looks like he was also fired, okay. And that's directly from him and his family.
So that's a lot of knowledge that walked out the door. So who's taking their place?
Well, these were people, 2 of them actually were what they call unit managers. They are commanders over an entire floor of the jail, of the 4 main floors where inmates are held. And another 2 were at intake and processing. And the 5th, who they say resigned, a lot of big questions about that. Mm-hmm. He ran the training academy. So she is going to need experience replacements or get some people some training really quick. Just the training, for example, requires a certain level of certification, because these are post-certified positions, and you have to have credentials to run that kind of a training class or academy. There is nobody left on that staff with those kind of credentials. So I don't know if she's going to bring people from the outside or get her people trained up. It leaves 2 whole floors of that jail, and she did state in a press release that she would be announcing their replacements. We've yet to hear of those replacements. This is very interesting, coming from the sheriff who ran on accountability and transparency, that the public has generally heard very, very little from Susan Hudson. I've personally tried, on behalf of my station, many, many times to get comments and statements and, follow-up interviews with her, all either declined or in many cases I'd never even heard back. So I do think that, at some point she's going to have to, kind of do the public-facing parts of the duties to which she was elected. I know that even with the one appearance she made before the council, in which she claimed, security reasons for not disclosing the shortage of deputies, and the council just said, "Look, we, pay for the majority chunk of your budget. We need to know how many deputies you need and how many vacancies you have."
Okay, so we're still waiting right now to see
On a
who's
lot
gonna
of
replace
things.
those. Or what? What's that? And
I
other
said, no,
things?
we're waiting for a lot of
other things.
unanswered questions
Right.
from the sheriff, and I do, think, well, she's not addressing the media, but the next council hearing, in which we're getting into that budget season, and she is going to have to make some appearances and answer some questions from that council.
Okay, we'll be looking at that. Thanks a lot, Mike. Okay, Jeff, over to you. It is beginning, the official Saints season. How we're looking?
Yeah, it's September, Marcia. Hope and optimism abounds this time of year. Every team in the league right now thinks this is going to be their year. They're going to the Super Bowl. But I do think there's reason to have optimism for this Saints team. Last year was quite a struggle. As Sean Payton's last year, they went 9-8. They had more injuries than any team in the league. Some of those key injured players are coming back, including quarterback Jameis Winston and star receiver Michael Thomas. Both of them have looked great in training camp so far. First-year coach Dennis Allen, very optimistic internally about this team. I think they feel like they're flying under the radar a little bit. This is the first season here in New Orleans that the Saints will play without either Sean Payton or Drew Brees. So they're somewhat under the radar nationally. They're not getting a lot of attention. There wasn't a lot of national media coverage or reporters coming to town, and I think they like that. Internally, like I said, Saints coaches, players, front office executives, they feel like they're a little bit of a sleeping giant right now, and we're going to find out really soon how good this team is once they play Sunday in Atlanta.
So what do you think about this Sunday?
Well, look, I think they're much more talented than the Atlanta Falcons. It's amazing. This series goes back to the beginning of the Saints, 1967, the first year. The Saints won that first game against the Falcons, and they've been behind in the series ever since. 105 games between the two teams. Atlanta's won 53. The Saints have won 52. They have a chance to even the series now for the first time since the 60s. So I know Saints fans will be looking forward to that. I think the Saints really do have a great chance to win the division, get back in the playoffs. They missed the playoffs for the first time in 5 years last year, but a lot has to go right, Marcia. Like I said, they have to have players like Jameis Winston play at a high level and avoid injury. He's coming off a severe knee injury, and this is a very violent game. They do have a very capable backup quarterback. I talked to Sean Payton this past week. He was very high on both these quarterbacks. Thinks Andy Dalton is a guy that could come in and lead this team to the playoffs if something were to happen to Jameis Winston. So I think defensively, this team is, let me say this team is not going to look like those Drew Brees, Sean Payton teams. I think a lot of people are excited about the receivers that they brought in, the new receivers, quarterback Jameis Winston, but I think they're going to play a lot more like those old Jim Mora Dome Patrol teams. Lean on the very strong defense, lean on their kicking game. They have a very good kicker in Will Lutz, and try and win games in the 20s and make other teams drive the field against that defense. I don't think it's going to be a high-flying, high-scoring team this year. That's just not the way this team's built.
Well, we wish them all the luck, and we wish them all the best in staying healthy, too. I mean, I know that's a challenge for the kind of game they play.
Yeah, very much so. And look, they brought in a new strength and conditioning coach to handle that. He's a director of sports science, really on the cutting edge of trying to keep these guys healthy on the front end, avoiding injuries, especially soft tissue injuries.
Okay. All right, Jeff. Thanks a lot. Dawn, over to you. And you looked into a problem that's just really disturbing that's happening in not just our region, but really across the country, and that's food insecurity.
Food insecurity. Nationwide, people are struggling. In Louisiana, the numbers, according to Second Harvest Food Bank, are 1 in 5 Louisianians are in danger of food insecurity. And that doesn't necessarily mean I don't have enough calories to eat today, but I don't have access to quality foods, and I might run the risk of not having anything extra in my pantry that might be the quality food people need to eat. Second Harvest Food Bank has one of their largest fundraisers and kind of most fun fundraisers happening this weekend. It's a month-long build-up to the Rubber Duck Derby that happens tomorrow, Saturday, at the Big Lake in City Park at 2 o'clock. Their goal was to sell I believe it's 30,000 rubber ducks where they race them down the Big Lake and you win prizes. And it not only raises money for Second Harvest, but also raises awareness of the problem of food insecurity. And they say that in the 23 parishes in South Louisiana that Second Harvest supports, they don't just support those parishes, they support the food pantries and shelters and school food programs throughout that region. They're seeing not the regular faces completely anymore. They're seeing, often it's the working poor and the elderly, but now they're seeing people from all walks of life and every single zip code who are dealing with this issue. We made it through COVID. People have their jobs back. People are working a couple of jobs, but inflation is now the bigger problem, and it's a disaster that's not going away as fast as, say, the couple weeks after a hurricane when people might struggle. It's a disaster that's long-lived, and they're watching their numbers of people who need food and need resources increase 5% month after month after month. So it's blowing in population, and their cost of operations, the cost of the warehouse and the utilities for the warehouse and the cost of the food that, when they like the gifts of food, but they also have to purchase certain food items. Their after-school snack programs, they like to have consistency in that program, so they purchase the food, and those costs have gone up for everybody. One weird thing that's kind of hurt them a little bit this year is that we have not had, thank God, one of those natural disasters when they can kind of raise awareness about this problem. They get the chance to have some media access to say, we have hunger is a problem during this disaster, but it's also a disaster that happens all year long. So they haven't been able to get that messaging out because there hasn't been the kind of disaster we were all too familiar with the last couple of summers, which is good news and bad news. You can donate through the Rubber Duck Derby this weekend and donate anytime, food. You can help. You can also give money, but it's a problem that's not going anywhere and is continuing to get worse.
So is it preferable to them, to the Second Harvest Food Bank, to get cash donations as opposed to food?
They say that's the best donation for them because they can use it most wisely. And when it's the food, they've got to watch expiration dates. They've got to watch where certain foods can go to certain places. They have to watch whether it's perishable, whether cans are damaged, all that sort of thing, and make sure they have the storage space for what's being donated at the time it's being donated. Yeah. So cash is certainly king, but they're happy to have help any way they can get it.
So remind us again about all the ducks.
The Rubber Duck Derby takes off at the Big Lake at City Park at 2 o'clock tomorrow.
Okay, and so it is a fundraiser for Second Harvest.
Right, and you can find all the information online on their website too.
All right, Dawn, important story. Thanks a lot. All right, Jeff, back over to you because there's other football too that we need to take a look at.
Yes, LSU opened their season this past Sunday in the Superdome. I know Tigers fans were really disappointed. It was a wild, crazy finish. LSU losing in the last second on a blocked extra point. I know fans are disappointed. It's the first game of Coach Brian Kelly's tenure in Baton Rouge, and they were upset by Florida State. But I think there's reason to be encouraged. The way that team came back in that game, quarterback Jaden Daniels in his first game, very difficult situation playing on national TV against a good opponent. I think they'll get back on track this week. They play Southern, crosstown rival, at Tiger Stadium. They really got Southern outmanned. And Tulane also opened last week. They opened with a victory against UMass, University of Massachusetts, out at Ullman Stadium. They have another game at home this week against Alcorn State. A great chance, I think, for Tulane to start 2-0. It's been a while since they've started 2-0. They've got a terrific quarterback in Michael Pratt, a guy that has a chance to, I think, play at the next level in the NFL. And Willie Fritz, I think, has dialed back the schedule a little bit this year. It's a little more user-friendly. They played a very difficult schedule last year. I think this team has a chance to get back into the bowl picture this year.
And so back to the LSU Tigers. I mean, there's a new coach there, and I know some Tiger fans are a little bit worried and were really disappointed in this last game and dismayed and worried about the future. Should they be?
No, I don't think so. Look, it's a big rebuilding job. I looked at the depth chart when I was at the stadium on Sunday. 12 players in the two-deep roster, either starting or backups, are transfer players from other programs. That should not happen at a program of LSU's status. It shouldn't happen with that many new players being leaned on right away. It tells you just how big of a rebuilding job Brian Kelly, his staff have. I think they're going to get there. Scott Woodward didn't hire Brian Kelly for this season. He hired him for the long haul. He has a 10-year contract. They've recruited really well. I think fans should enjoy this season, lower the expectations, because this is going to be a long rebuilding job.
All righty. Well, we shall see, and we wish them all the best of luck. We want to see victories out of everybody. I hope we get them. All right, guys, it's time to take a look at some other stories, and we have a little bit of time here if you want to embellish a couple of things. So let's go with you first, E.
Okay, well, this is kind of looking back. Speaking of Moon Landrieu, this was in the early days of Informed Sources. We used to have a segment on some shows where we'd bring in somebody for an interview in addition to the regular discussion. So this was Moon Landrieu, who's in the background. You can see the regular panel for the show. If you look real hard, you can see Marcia in the background. But anyway, Moon Landrieu was the guest. And what we were talking about with congressional elections were coming up, and Louisiana still did not have a majority black district. And so we're talking about that issue. And so race was always an issue that with wherever he went, it was always part of the discussion. What was really interesting about this show is that it was carried nationwide by C-SPAN.
Right.
C-SPAN at the time used to do that kind of thing where they get local broadcasts that were relevant to politics and pick them up. So this went nationwide.
Nationwide, it sure did. Thanks a lot, E, for reminding us about that. All right, let's go on over to you, Mike.
Well, you always like it as a reporter, and especially as an investigative reporter, when a couple different areas of inquiry overlap, and the big overlap. And I did a story about a gentleman by the name of Keyshawn Webster, had been the director of the juvenile jail, got hired to what some people say was an outrageous $36,000 just for the first month of Sheriff Susan Hudson's tenure as the so-called, interim, chief of staff, despite all kinds of mismanagement that's been exposed about his time at the juvenile jail. Well, I have another story coming up on yet more questionable spending by Webster when he was back at the juvenile jail that really just has a lot of people scratching their heads. Between those two jails and Keyshawn Webster having a, making money off of both of them is raising a lot of questions.
All right, we'll be looking for that quickly.
Next week on Channel 4.
Don?
Pediatric Cancer Awareness Month started with September 1st. Kids Join the Fight, which is an organization founded by a local cancer patient, Walker Beery, who unfortunately passed away a year ago from brain cancer. There are fundraisers all over the nation. They're going for the 50-state challenge. So if you see kids in yellow with a Kids Join the Fight logo, help them out. It's a very local cause for a very nationwide problem.
All right. Jeff, to you. We don't have as much time as I thought you would have, but I know you wanted to explain something to the folks.
Yes, very much, Marcia. This next weekend, the 18th, is the Saints home opener at the Superdome. Tom Brady, Tampa Bay Bucks coming to town. Going to be a huge crowd. I'm just warning you, get there early, have a plan. There's ongoing construction work at the Superdome right now. We're in the middle of a $450 million renovation. These next 2 years, it's going to be inconvenient getting to and from your seats. They've changed the entry and egress system there. So you need to get there early and be patient because it's going to be a little bit of a hassle the next 2 years.
All right, give yourself time. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for watching. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES-TV.